Let's go on. We have to keep moving. Gabriel Rosen, please.
Why is anti-Semitism rising in the UK?
Why is anti-Semitism...
And do you think a certain member of the panel may bear some responsibility for this?
Jonathan Friedland.
Well, like a lot of people, I was very dispirited by these new figures that came out today that showed that anti-Semitic attacks in Britain had risen to the highest figure ever recorded, 1,100 attacks last year. Some people may think that's not such a big figure, but Britain's Jews are a small community, less than 300,000. And it's dispiriting because we know, and we've seen so recently, that these kinds of attacks, and Paris is the example that's in my mind, can lead to murderous consequences. So there's huge fear about that. I don't think Britain, incidentally, is an anti-Semitic country. I don't. The Jewish community, and I'm proudly a member of that community, we've put down deep roots here, and the community has been allowed to thrive. I don't think the country is in any way anti-Semitic, and that's not what people are frightened of, and there is fear. The fear is instead of that kind of Paris scenario, of this murderous death cult, and that's what they are, of individuals who might try to repeat in London or Manchester, where there are large Jewish communities, what was seen in Paris. So the fear is from those handful of those sort of violent jihadist individuals. Now, as to why there may be an increase, and there are these figures that have recorded an increase, there was an upsurge in the numbers last summer when violence resumed in Gaza. And so violence in the Middle East, and the people who keep these figures know this, every time there's violence in the Middle East, it's followed by an increase in anti-Semitic attacks here. Now, why is that? That's because some of the rhetoric around Israel gets so heated and so inflamed that people who can't hold always that distinction in their mind between what's Israel, a country several thousand miles away, and what are Jews, people here.
Oh, well, wait.
They can't always hold that distinction in their mind, and some of that rhetoric spills over. And since you mentioned the person, member of the panel tonight, George Galloway, I know, is on people's minds, and some of what he has said, I know he's usually very careful to draw a distinction between Jews and Israel, but some of the rhetoric he has used on Israel, some of the ideas he's planted on Israel, for example, suggesting that Israel may have been behind the Ukrainian revolution. And there's, I've got the quotes here if that comes to question. Or suggesting, wait a second, or suggesting that chemical weapons attack in Syria in August 2013, that Al-Qaeda and Israel had teamed up together to stage that operation. If people hear that kind of thing, and believe that Israel is somehow uniquely the source of all evil in the world, even terrible things that happen miles away, they are going to eventually not be able to contain their fury and lash out even at Jewish targets. Unfortunately, the evidence is there. It happens every time there's trouble in the Middle East. So somebody like George Galloway, who definitely has a following and an audience and has wonderful powers of rhetoric, we've heard them tonight, he and people like him need to exercise great responsibility in this area, because it is incendiary, it's sensitive, and as we've seen from these figures today, it can lead to hate.
Okay. George Galloway.
Well, I see, David, that with characteristic care you have carefully balanced the audience this evening. The question...
Listen,
well, listen,
I'll bring you in.
You can be the lions.
Let Mr. Galloway
You can be the
speak.
lions. I'll be Daniel. You will not stop me speaking. You will not stop me speaking. You will not stop me speaking, however much you shout. Because when the Charlie Hebdo affair erupted, there were millions of people demanding that freedom of speech should be protected. And no one in Britain will accept the right of those shouting at me now to exclude a British Member of Parliament from the BBC in any constituency in Britain. None of you will. No. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry that Jonathan Friedland, in what he has just said, has given credence to the absolutely false allegation implicit in the question. You see, I know about political violence. I was assaulted 3 times in 4 months in London. Well, you say I wonder why. This is, of course, making my point. You see, you're in favour of some political violence, but against other political violence. You're in favour of freedom of speech for some people, but not for other people. Not a single, not one single spokesman for the Jewish community, not a single Jewish community newspaper condemned the assaults upon me, which have led to the imprisonment of 1 man and the fining of 2 others.
George, can you come?
Did you set me up here?
No, you're not.
Am I on trial
No.
here? Well, let me speak.
Answer the question.
Let me speak. I'm being bayed at by the audience.
All right, George.
I've been directly accused by another panellist. Let me answer.
What he accused you of, and what I'd like you to address, not about how you've been assaulted.
No, I will.
But the conflation between Israel and Jewishness or Jews, which is what actually...
This is a dangerous conflation. It's a false synonym. Zionism and Israel are different things from Judaism and Jewishness. And anybody who confuses these 2 things, whether they're an anti-Semite or whether they are so-called leaders of the Jewish community, is making a grave mistake. Now, the Community Safety Trust, as Jonathan has just done, blamed the spike on what Jonathan described as a resumption of violence in Gaza last summer. I think what he meant was the mass murder of 2,136 Palestinians locked up in a prison camp called Gaza. 500 of them children. 500 of them children. He called it... All
right, listen, all right, hold on a second.
He called it a resumption of violence. Other people call it mass murder by Israel. No.
All right, now, George, just wait a minute, George. Look, you've got a number of you are just shouting. There are a number of people who I can see who are actually agreeing with what George is saying. I'd like just, George, if you'd pause a moment. Let's hear from you, because you've been shouting there in the corner there.
Thank you.
Make your remarks, and one of the 2 of you who've been shouting. Because I want this to be, which it should be in question time, a reasoned debate, not a shouting match.
Thank
you. You go first, and then I'll give George a chance to answer what you say, and then we'll have the other members of the panel. You go first.
George, your comments are deliberately provocative. Just last year, you declared Bradford an Israeli free zone. In doing so, what you did is you took a deep-rooted, multifaceted conflict in another area of the world and brought it to the streets of the UK. And in doing that, you directed your comments indirectly to the Jewish community. And as a result of that, you put the British Jewish community on the front line at a very volatile time.
All right. You're in the white shirt.
Me?
Yes, you're in the white shirt.
George Galloway sits here and he says he's got nothing to do with anti-Semitism, but when he goes and he encourages Hezbollah in Lebanon, who dance in the streets when Jews are killed in Israel, and he's videos on YouTube handing over cash. He said, this is the money, handed it over to a Hamas official in Gaza, who encourage and endorse suicide bombings on Israeli streets. Jews care a lot more about encouraging murder of Jews than in making little grandiose statements on this stage about Jews in London.
Hang on, and the woman behind you. Yes.
I think that with everything that George has said and everything that I have heard of him in Bradford and outside of Bradford, he's always made a clear distinction between Zionism and Israel's foreign policy and not being anti-Semite. And I think, just going back to your point, Jonathan, you used, it seems your favourite word in what you were saying was rhetoric, Israel's rhetoric. A lot of what Israel does is not rhetoric. What George said about Gaza was 100% correct, and you have to accept some of it is factual. Sorry, Some of it is factual. It's not all rhetoric.
I wasn't talking about Israel's rhetoric. I was talking about George
No, but you
Galloway's
used
rhetoric.
that. You said
because I
there's a
was
lot
being
of
asked
rhetoric
about
around Israel. You categorically said that. There's a lot of rhetoric around Israel. The press has a lot of rhetoric around Israel. You mentioned that in connection
I think you
with
just
Israel.
said Israeli rhetoric.
All right, let us go on. Let's go on with the discussion. George, we'll come back to you, of course. Christina O'Doney.
Driving up here to North Finchley, we passed with the taxi an unbearable sight. It was a synagogue. Police all around it, barbed wire, cameras everywhere. And I thought, and this is a temple where people pray, and it has to be shielded like this and protected like this. I agree. But what I'm saying is, it's not just the George Galloways among us who may or may not have, and I think he has, fueled this hostility. But an atmosphere has now developed in which the Jewish community of 240,000 people, so very small minority, is feeling put upon. And whether it is the attacks on kosher slaughters, whether it is the Ofsted inspectors who go to Orthodox Jewish schools and say, hey, why is it that you say that women should be modestly covered? Why is it that you don't approve of gay weddings? There's something going on in the air, and it is anti-Semitic.
All right. Nicky Morgan, let me go around the rest of the panel, George, then we'll come back to you. Nicky Morgan.
Your question was about the rise in anti-Semitism. I think John used the word dispiriting. I'd use the word deeply depressing. The British Jews make an enormous contribution to our society. And this country has a proud tradition of offering asylum to those most in need. And we have just marked in this country the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz and Holocaust Memorial Day. And it's not just the Jewish community. There are many communities who have come to this country seeking safety and refuge and actually reveling or making the most of the freedoms that we have in this country. Freedom of speech, which is why it's right that George Galloway is invited on a panel like this and able to put his views, and you're able to put your views. But also respect and tolerance of other faiths and beliefs.
So what's your answer to the question that Gabriel asked, which is why is anti-Semitism rising?
Because I think, sadly, there are some people in this country who do want the British Jews to be fearful. And it breaks my heart to think that there are young Jewish boys and girls who are now frightened walking to school, whose parents are frightened about what might be happening when they are at school, who are having to hide the fact that they are Jewish. And that's not just about Jewish, that's about any community. I don't want them to feel frightened on the streets of this country. I say we have a proud tradition, and I think it is deeply depressing what we are seeing. It's right to have a debate of some sorts tonight, but I'm afraid it's absolutely right that you should make your views known about what George Galloway has to say.
George Galloway.
Well, I can't tell you how deeply I and people who support me will resent the course of this part of the programme. Anti-Semitism is a foul and virulent form of racism which led in the 1930s and 40s to the Holocaust, the greatest crime in human history. I wasn't born then. I had nothing to do with that. And if I had been born then, I would have been the first in the line at the recruitment office to fight fascism, which was a Christian European phenomenon. Now, everything that's been said with melancholy.
Do you know how many priests and nuns were
just take your hand off me. Take your hands off me. Everything that's been said here with melancholy about the shadow cast by the rise in anti-Semitism could be said manyfold about the Islamophobia and the fear of Muslims in Britain. The number of attacks on Muslims, on Muslim property, is many times more than these fascistic attacks. It is many times more than these fascistic attacks on Jews and Jewish property. Why can't we all oppose anti-Semitism and Islamophobia? Why can't we oppose not just the attacks on kosher, but the attacks on halal?
Of course,
which
I oppose that too.
UKIP, who are not here tonight, just yesterday said they would ban, meaning that the observant Jews and observant Muslims in this country would have to leave the country. Why can't we unite around issues like that?
All right,
my last point, David, one last
point.
point. I beg you, don't conflate Zionism, Israel, and Jews in London. It's a very dangerous thing to do. No, it's a... No.
All right, don't
no.
shout. Please
Many
don't
Jews,
shout out.
No.
Please don't shout.
Many Jews are not Zionists, and most Zionists are not Jews.
All right.
And it's a very dangerous game that you're playing here. Very dangerous.
All right. Can we please have silence for a moment? Tristram Hunt hasn't spoken. I want to hear what he has to say. Tristram.
This is not an arms race between Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. In the community I represent in Stoke-on-Trent, we had effectively a terrorist attack on our mosque in Hanley, in the middle of our community. But the figures from the Community Security Trust today are deeply worrying of Jews being attacked for being Jews. And when you read the report about old men being attacked on their way to synagogues, about gravestones being desecrated, about the labels put on Jewish produce in supermarkets. Because when you look at the history of this, it begins with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. And it begins with the boycott of Jewish goods, and it often moves to an attack on Jewish lives. And so we have to be very, very careful about disassociating legitimate protest about the actions of Israel, and I hold no candle for the Netanyahu government, and the cancer of anti-Semitism, which we should also be clear is on the rise across Europe. And whether it's the attacks in Belgium, in the museum in Belgium, whether it's the shooting of Jewish children in Toulouse, whether it's the Molotov cocktails thrown at synagogues in Germany, this cancer is growing again in Europe. And for me, this makes the establishment and the protection and the security of the State of Israel incredibly important, that they have this security still available. And
not one final point. You say over that, because we're coming towards the end here.
Just to say, my fellow Jews may not be too pleased, but I listened to a programme, I believe, on Press TV. George Galloway may have forgot it, but he actually bawled out someone who telephoned in when he realised that she was being anti-Semitic, accusing Jews of running the world or whatever it is. So I don't regard George Galloway at all as an anti-Semite. I think he is very misguided in many, many other areas. But the point I'd like to make to the programme, to listeners, is that there is unfortunately a strong correlation, in answer to the question made, between the rise of the number of Muslims in Europe and the rise in anti-Semitism. We are not told in the number of acts that are made against Jews, I don't know if they're recorded this way, how many come from Muslims and how many don't. But I suspect that there's a very strong relationship.
All right. Well, I'm afraid we've got hands up all around here. I have to stop because the hour of the programme is up. And we